Hello and salam Malaysia Madani. Welcome to On the Table. We are broadcasting on RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel 123, which is also live streaming on YouTube. I'm your host, Brendan Lepol. And welcome to the On Table once again. And the 46th ASEAN Summit concluded on Tuesday in Kuala Lumpur after a series of high-level engagements aimed at reinforcing regional cooperation and strategic partnerships. Held under Malaysia's 2025 ASEAN Chairmanship themed Inclusivity and Sustainability. Now, the two-day summit included the second ASEAN Gulf Cooperation Council GCC Summit, the inaugural ASEAN GCC China Summit, and the 16th Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle IMTGT Summit. Now, what's next after the conclusion of the 46th ASEAN Summit and related meetings? To discuss further, joining us today virtually is Chris Humphrey, the Executive Director of EU-ASEAN Business Council. Mr. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Now, Mr. Chris, we're just wondering, what are your key takeaways from the ASEAN Summit 2025 held recently in Kuala Lumpur?
Well, the whole number of events and related meetings seem to have been a great success. I think one of the key takeaways for us, particularly in the business community, was the signing of the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on ASEAN's shared future, and particularly the economic parts of that, where they pledged to do a lot more to drive forward ASEAN regional integration and advance in areas like digital and sustainability. They are very important areas, I think, for Southeast Asia going forward.
Right. Mr. Chris, how do you see the current state of EU-ASEAN trade and investment relations following the EU summit?
I think we see it as being very good. In fact, EU-ASEAN trade's been growing over the last few years. It's come out strong post the pandemic. We see that growth continuing. We see more investment coming in from European businesses. And at a political level, we're now in the best place we've been for many, many, many years. We have 2 FTAs in place, Singapore and Vietnam, and 4 FTAs under negotiation with Malaysia, with Thailand, with the Philippines, and with Indonesia. And we see those now as being key. I think when we are living in a world of economic turmoil and uncertainty, the US trade, it's beholden on both the EU and ASEAN to look to find ways to work closer together and drive more trade investment between the two blocks.
Now, when you mentioned, Mr. Chris, drive more trade, etc., we will be faced with challenges that lies ahead. Now, talking about these challenges, what challenges are still present right now as we speak for European businesses looking to expand in ASEAN markets?
Well, I'm afraid European businesses are operating in a bit of a disadvantage compared to their peers, say from India or Korea or Japan in particular, because of the lack of free trade agreements. So we need those existing negotiations to be accelerated and got over the line very, very quickly. There are issues around market access in certain sectors. There are restrictions on imports and quotas in some places, things like local content requirements in a country like Indonesia. These all inhibit trade and the growth of trade. Businesses have been quite good at working around it. European businesses have been operating in ASEAN, some of them for over a century now. So we're not just foreigners here. We are actually well invested into local communities, into the countries. And I think that really does help us mean that when we come to do business, meet as friends.
Mr. Chris, now, are there steps taken in addressing these challenges with regards to Business Council? How are they moving forward, creating the pathway to ensure that their vision and their strategy is not compromised with regards to the summit that was held, and of course various strategies as well being put on the table?
Well, as a Business Council here, we're here to support our members, European industry. Part of our remit is to engage with governments across the region and try and remove some of those barriers to trade and barriers to investment that we see. So we act as a focal point for European industry. We go there and we advocate on behalf of all our members. I must say, I think ASEAN is increasingly opening up. It sees the need to do more with other people. And the US trade policy at the moment is actually helping in that regard. They see Europe, I think, as a friend, and Europe increasingly sees ASEAN as a place it needs to do things with. making sure we have the access for investment and for trade requires an effort, not just on behalf of the private sector, it requires an effort on behalf of governments and indeed from the European Commission.
Right. And for those who are just joining us right now, welcome to On the Table. We are talking to Mr. Chris Humphrey, the post-46 ASEAN Summit that was held recently in Kuala Lumpur. We are here to get Mr. Chris takeaways with regards to those summit and other related meetings. Now, Mr. Chris Humphrey, the Prime Minister, Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim, pledged Malaysia to give focus and high commitment towards making ASEAN as a competitive digital hub. Now, how do you think the EU and ASEAN can collaborate better in this area? And do you think, in your own words, is it achievable or on the contrary?
That's a very good question. ASEAN is currently working on its digital economy framework agreement. That will be a very ambitious and legally binding agreement amongst the 10 member states, and it will govern all aspects of digital economy going forward, not just e-commerce, but data flows, data governance, data localization, electronic trading, consumer protection, etc., as well as emerging technologies. That will be a key document, and we have to wait and see how that looks when it comes out. Hopefully we'll get a better idea by the end of this year. But we have to also look at it. ASEAN is a growth area for digital businessing, digital trade. It's looking like becoming a substantial part of the ASEAN economy going forward, looking at a near doubling of electronic trade, e-commerce over the next decade in the region. We can't ignore it. ASEAN also has a great population, very, very tech-savvy, a high number of digital unicorns in the region as well. So you're asking me, what can Europe do to support? I think actually one of my questions would be, what can ASEAN do to support Europe in its own digital development? Because in many respects, I think we're more advanced here in Southeast Asia than Europe is. But there are things that Europe's done and helped with. They've helped with contractual model clauses development in Southeast Asia. They're exchanging information about artificial intelligence, and indeed, I think there's a summit planned for that in August between the EU and ASEAN. But I think there are areas that both sides could help each other. Europe just needs to ask ASEAN, what help and assistance would you like from us?
Now, Mr. Chris Humphrey, we're going for a short break, but before we go into this break, now you've mentioned when I asked you the first question with regards to ASEAN, and you mentioned that 2045 is such a long way from now on. We're talking about a long-term vision, which is a 20-year vision. And ASEAN Secretary General Dr. Kao Kim Hon has mentioned that this is actually a very bold move, but he welcomed this initiative and this vision. We just want to get your key takeaways of this long vision about 20 years. What do you think about this, Mr. Chris?
Well, I think the first thing to say, it's a 20-year vision on the physical security and cultural social parts of the ASEAN community. It's a 5-year vision for the economic side, and I think that is an incredibly sensible approach. In the past, we've had 10-year visions, and they're very, very hard to maintain. And trying to get to 10 years, what you started off thinking the world would look like looks very, very different in economic issues. I think you see currently the economic turmoil we're facing, things can change very, very rapidly. They certainly change rapidly in the digital space. So a 5-year vision for the economic pillar is very, very sensible. If you look inside the details of the Kuala Lumpur Declaration, there are things in there that ASEAN is really pushing for. More intra-ASEAN trade, more advancements on digital, more advancements on circular economy. And these are things I think that everyone would really, really welcome. The 20-year vision for political security, for cultural, social, I think that is also sensible and sane. ASEAN was founded as a political security body. I think if we look ahead on a 20-year vision, we want to maintain peace and unity within the region, and I think that's sensible.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chris. Now, it's time to take a short break, and when we come back, there's more to discuss right after this. This is On the Table. And welcome back to On the Table. If you're just joining us, we are talking about the post-46 ASEAN Summit, the challenges and opportunities that lies ahead. Now, we are also speaking to Chris Humphrey, the Executive Director of EU-ASEAN Business Council, on the post-46 ASEAN Summit opportunities and also challenges, highlighting these elements. Now, Mr. Chris, ASEAN recently unveiled a new 5-year strategic plan aiming to deepen economic integration among its 10 member nations. Now, how might this plan influence the EU-ASEAN trade relations?
Well, at the Council, we've been pressing for many, many years for acceleration of ASEAN's regional economic integration. Anything that helps the movement of services and goods around the region will benefit any business operating in Southeast Asia, and that includes European industry. I think more importantly, it would make the region even more attractive for future investments. If you can be assembling a product in one ASEAN country, drawing your supply chain from across the ASEAN region, and therefore moving your goods through the supply chain much easier and smoother, that makes the region even more attractive. But I should say, the fundamentals of ASEAN's growth story remain strong and have been strong for a number of years. We have growing economies, we have growing rates of urbanization, growing middle class, relatively well and high educated populations, critical raw materials as well. All of these make ASEAN very attractive. If we can just remove some of those internal barriers to trade, get customs procedures to be operating more seamlessly without the burdensome bureaucracy we currently face, then I think that puts ASEAN in an extremely strong position going forward, and European businesses will want to come here and they'll want to thrive with the region.
Mr. Chris, will there be any other forms of opportunity? And what does it present for European businesses as a whole?
I think you look at the world today and you look where the growth spots are in the world. ASEAN is clearly the bright bulb flashing on the global map, certainly doing better than Europe. And if you're looking also at what's going on in terms of trade generally and the global instability we're currently facing, I think you're going to see a lot more supply chain diversification going on, and I think ASEAN is well placed to take advantage of that. European businesses know that. They will look to come here and they'll be looking to manufacture, not just to export from ASEAN, which was always the traditional model, but more and more to manufacture in ASEAN for ASEAN markets and help to strengthen the region. There's so much to offer here, and it doesn't matter what you're in automotive, you're in pharmaceuticals, you're in general manufacturing, you're in fast-moving consumer goods. The region really is where you want to be.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chris. We're about to dive in just a little deeper. Now, from the EU's perspective, how does engagement with the ASEAN Summit directly benefit Europe's economic and also at the same time geopolitical interests?
Well, unfortunately, of course, Europe wasn't in Kuala Lumpur this week for the 46th summit. I would expect them to be there in October for the 47th summit when it takes place. Again, I think in this current situation, we're in the current geopolitical situation we see in the world, Europe needs to be talking more to like-minded friends like ASEAN. So I think you'll see President Costa here, the President of the EU Council, in October. I'm sure he'll be meeting all the ASEAN leaders, as well as other partners who will be in town then, and using it as a foundation stone, I think, for reaching out and growing those relationships even more going forward. That will naturally help, not just on political issues and global and security issues, but will clearly help on trade and investment issues as well.
Now, Mr. Chris, we have leaders joining us, the heads of states, government from ASEAN member states as well, 10 countries joining us. And of course, this time around is a little different as we have Timor-Leste joining us. Now, the leaders, they have all agreed that any bilateral trade agreements with the United States, we're talking about tariffs, should not negatively impact other member nations. Now, how might this stance affect EU-ASEAN economic relations, especially in light of global trade tensions?
I think they're two separate issues, to be honest with you. I think EU-ASEAN trade relations, as I mentioned earlier, are in a pretty good place, but we need to get more of those trade deals over the line that are currently being negotiated, particularly with countries like Malaysia. Whatever deals ASEAN countries do or do not do with Washington, D.C., I don't think will impact that. It actually may help that. Because if we look at a country like Indonesia, the Americans are saying to them they need to change some of their policies, like local content requirements and non-automatic import licenses. If Indonesia does that in response to the Americans, that will actually speed up the chance to get an EU-Indonesia FTA over the line. But overall, I think whatever ASEAN does to satisfy or not satisfy the Europeans, if they can try and work more closely as well, make sure they don't have an adverse effect on each other, that strengthens that position. And I think the EU would.
All right, Mr. Chris, thank you so much for that elaboration. Now, Mr. Chris, how might the EU support ASEAN's efforts in addressing internal challenges? First and foremost, the ASEAN declarations, one of the aims and purposes we are talking about is supporting each other with regards to the regional bloc in addressing challenges, so on and so forth. But when it comes to addressing internal challenges, such as the ongoing crisis in Myanmar, to promote peace and stability in the region, my question to you would be, how might the EU support ASEAN's efforts in realizing this ambition?
Well, I think the first thing to say, the EU is a significant contributor to ASEAN in terms of aid and development opportunities and projects. Do a lot of work to support ASEAN regional economic integration. We also do a lot of work on both the social and cultural side in terms of education exchanges and support, and on political security. A lot of support, for instance, on tackling transnational crime coming from the EU. So the EU is providing a lot of support already for ASEAN at the request of the ASEAN bloc. Myanmar is a difficult issue, and we've seen ASEAN struggle to deal with it and struggle to have influence over the junta in Naypyidaw. The EU has put in place a range of sanctions. I think the only way that the situation in Myanmar can be improved by a collective international response that would have to involve ASEAN, it would have to involve the EU, it would have to involve the Americans, it would have to involve the Indians and a whole range of other partners.
Thank you, Mr. Chris. And we're about to take one more short break. And right after this, Mr. Chris will talk more about the ASEAN economic landscape with regards to how it's evolving, and more right after this. So let's go for a short break. And when we come back, that question will be directed to Mr. Chris. Stay tuned. Welcome to On the Table.
Obviously, there are two main engines of growth in any economies. What are the implications of Malaysia's growth on employment, income levels, and also standard of living for the population?
From a historical perspective, it's been good.
The capacity in our country can be built to be in the same level as the world standards.
And welcome back to On the Table. We're talking to Mr. Chris Humphrey, post-ASEAN 46 ASEAN Summit opportunities and also challenges. We are about to highlight that. Now, Mr. Chris, welcome back. Now, how can European businesses best position themselves with regards to engaging with the evolving ASEAN economic landscape?
I think we're seeing an ASEAN now that is definitely moving up the food chain, if you like, when it comes to economic issues. It's becoming much more sophisticated. We're seeing more higher in manufacturing. We see a growth, for instance, in semiconductor investments across the region, and growth in data center investments. A region which is rapidly maturing. You can see it in the digital area and the e-commerce space as well. But all of this, I think, just makes the region more and more attractive. European businesses no longer see ASEAN as a place to come and make things cheap and export them back to Europe or to the US very cheaply. That's not what the region's about. It's much more sophisticated than that. So now you're seeing higher end investments coming into Europe in semiconductors, in pharmaceuticals, in automated factories, in the automotive sector, into EVs. That is what the region is looking at now, and that is making it very attractive still for European business. And you couple all of that with their own regional economic integration agenda, with the place being very geographically well placed in the world, an outward-looking sense of direction from the region, and then rules-based global trading mindset as well. These are all the things which make Southeast Asia so attractive to European businesses. That's why they want to come here, trade more, and invest more.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mr. Chris, how can the EU and ASEAN both collaborate and work together to promote green technologies in both regions?
had a bit of a tricky relationship, to be honest, over the last few years when it comes to green economy and the European Green Deal. It has got better, it has improved. Europe is going through a simplification process of its own regulations. There needs to be more dialogue at a political level between the EU and ASEAN on green technology, on climate action, more understanding, more mutual support for each other as well. We're all facing the same problems. For ASEAN itself, there are significant things happening, things like the development of the ASEAN Power Group that was also discussed this week in Parliament. That presents opportunities for European businesses. Europe, after all, is the only continent that has a proper power grid, linking together all of the countries, exchanging electrical power, having the physical connections, having the legal agreements and the payment systems in place. It's an area where Europe can certainly help, support and advise ASEAN on. And I think that then creates business opportunities as well.
Okay, Mr. Chris. Coming back to the one of the initiative and one of the movements and engagement by Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim. Now, he penned out a letter to US President Donald Trump requesting a meeting with the ASEAN Summit. In your own views, do you think this will bear fruit at the end of the day?
The United States has been a long-standing dialogue partner of ASEAN and has always been invited to the ASEAN summit that normally happens in September, October timeframe. It's no surprise that they're inviting Donald Trump to come to that summit towards the end of the year. I would hope that he does come. If you look back at his first administration, he went to the Philippines in 2017 for the ASEAN summit there, but he didn't attend another one after that. We'll have to see what his view is. I think ASEAN trying to negotiate with the US as a single bloc is going to be very difficult. Actually, probably would not suit the interests of the Trump administration. They would rather go for a divide and rule approach. You see that in their approach on everything they deal with globally, not just trade issues. We'll have to wait and see. It's a bold move by Prime Minister Anwar, but it's not an unexpected move. The US normally turns up to the second ASEAN summit each year.
All right, Mr. Chris, thank you. And finally, before we go, let's come back to the EU-ASEAN business. What role can the EU-ASEAN businesses play, and of course with regards to the Council, in facilitating partnership when it comes to focusing on sustainability and digital transformation?
We're a convening organisation. We bring governments and businesses together on both sides. And that's what we will continue to do. We're hoping to run a business summit indeed in September alongside the ASEAN Economic Ministers meetings in KL. And at that summit, our focus will be on sustainability and it will be on digital economy. There are two important areas for both the EU and for ASEAN, but also for our members. So on the sustainability side, we'll be talking about how we can grow work on climate action, how we can green supply chains, and how we can also make sure we're looking after our workers and our customers at the same time. And on the digital side, we'll talk about how we can forge partnerships, public-private partnerships between European businesses and governments in Southeast Asia, help drive forward the digital economy even more and help make sure there's some kind of transfer going on. That's what we will try and do. That's what we do for a living at the Business Council, and we very much look forward to.
Thank you, Mr. Chris. Few more questions before you go, because we totally enjoy your elaboration based on all your POVs with regards to the ASEAN Summit and the key takeaways. Mr. Chris Humphrey, in all honesty, when it comes to all this summit and meetings, what are your hopes and aspirations? What are you really most looking at in order for a regional bloc to continue growing, to really highlight the sustainability approach by all nations with regards to the regional bloc, that they are putting all these strategies on the table?
That's a huge question. Thanks for that. I think what we would hope for is that ASEAN achieves its full potential and seizes the opportunities before it. And that does mean, and I think as the leaders noted this week, particularly Prime Minister Anwar, that means we really do have to drive forward on ASEAN regional integration. We need to make sure we are trading more with each other, because that helps insulate each other against external economic shocks like we've been seeing recently. The region has so much promise, You're never going to be a European Union, nor do you aspire to be, nor should you aspire to be. You can do much more collectively for your common good. As I've said frequently at various ASEAN meetings that I attend, 10 to the power of 10 is a much larger number than the sum of 10 ones. And I think ASEAN needs to bear that in mind. We need to start making sure we are working for the greater collective good of the region.
All right, Chris, this is the final question, sir. Now, with ASEAN engaging with the GCC on its second ASEAN GCC summit in Kuala Lumpur, how does the EU view these developments? And let's talk about its strategies. What strategies might the EU adopt to strengthen its ties with ASEAN?
I think ASEAN engaging with the GCC and having the ASEAN GCC China summit was a very clever move. If I was the chairman of ASEAN at the moment, I would be doing exactly what Prime Minister Anwar is doing and what the whole of the ASEAN bloc is doing, which is doing more outreach to more partners and forming new relationships and looking to develop more trade and investment and political ties. We live in a world where you need as many friends around you as you can get, and you need to hedge your bets a bit with your existing friends as well. So I think that's a very, very smart move. On the EU-ASEAN side, we need to have more engagement at the most senior levels. So President Macron being in the region at the moment is very much welcomed. We need more European commissioners to come out. I know the European Trade Commissioner was here recently. He'll be back in September. The European Commissioner for Climate Action will be attending the ASEAN Environment Ministers meeting in September. We need more of that engagement, showing the willingness to come, even when there's nothing to announce, forming the relationships at the political level, and then asking each other, how can we mutually support and help each other in these more troubled times? That would be the start, and I hope that would be the start of a much deeper and brilliant relationship. We're heading towards 50-year anniversary of EU-ASEAN relations, and I hope it can be elevated to an even higher level by the time we get there.
Mr. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
That's all the time we've got for On the Table this evening. And once again, thank you to Chris Humphrey, the Executive Director of EU-ASEAN Business Council, for sharing his insights with us. Now, a repeat of this episode's broadcast can be viewed again at the same time tomorrow and subsequent days on both RTM Click and MyTV's Berita RTM channel, as well as Berita RTM YouTube channel. Till then, I'm Brother Lepol. Thank you so much for your company. Stay safe and take care.